Hello again, everyone. It is your curator, Kevin Adkisson, with the Cranbrook Center for Collections and Research. And today I am coming to you live at 5 from Kingswood School, originally Kingswood School for Girls. And this has been a long-awaited tour, doing the inside of Kingswood. This is actually my first time going inside Kingswood since August, and I'm going to say this a few times throughout the tour, but classes have been meeting in person here at Cranbrook School, and you're going to see a lot of changes inside that reflect necessary room use because of COVID-19 and because of social distancing. Now, with that out of the way, I want to welcome you to what is probably the most highly anticipated Live at 5 we have had this year. And if you attended Kingswood, you certainly know this building well. If you attended the combined Cranbrook Kingswood schools, you had classes here as a high schooler. If you attended the middle school for girls, or if you were a parent, you also would have visited Kingswood. And if you haven't had a chance to be here in person, it is, I think, the most sublime corner of Cranbrook's campus. It is really the American masterpiece of the Saarinen family. Now, this building was completed in 1931, and it was really a gift to future generations, to the education of young women and today of young boys and girls from Ellen Booth. And so Cranbrook is the vision of George and Ellen Booth, but it was really Ellen's money that brought Cranbrook into being. And in the case of Kingswood School for Girls, it was really Ellen's insistence on having a place where young women could come and study. And I've talked about the history of Kingswood before. And so if you scroll back, I think in March or April, I know it was snowing, I did a tour of Kingswood on the exterior. And in that tour, I talked a little bit more about the history of how Kingswood was founded. But there's actually so much to see inside. Today, I want to sort of get straight to it and straight to looking. So what's most important for us to know is that this is the vision and the fruit of the generosity of Ellen Booth and her husband George. And then it is the design of the Saarinen family, with Eliel Saarinen serving as architect, Loya Saarinen designing textiles and coordinating interiors, Pipsan Saarinen Swanson, their daughter, designing stencils and color schemes, and Eero Saarinen, their son, designing furniture. Design work started in late 1929. Construction broke ground on October 1st of 1930, and classes began in September of 1931. So everything that you're seeing here was constructed in 1 year. And the building is divided into 3 main sections. There's the section of dormitories, which we won't see today, and that is sort of behind this main building. Then there's the more public aspects with the ballroom, the dining room, and the auditorium in the center. And we are starting with the classroom wing, which is, so you sort of walk up from the bus turnaround underneath this great concrete ceiling with these huge concrete beams looking towards Carl Millis's Diana. Jonah and the Whale, the sculpture over by the Art Academy, was originally sculpted for this location, but I think Diana is much more appropriate. And since 1949, we have entered by walking past the seal of Kingswood School. The school motto, enter to learn, go forth to serve. And then the school logo, which is an oak tree with a crown. And the logo was designed by George Booth, Henry Booth, and executed by Arthur Neville Kirk, and who was the Cranbrook Academy printer, as well as Edward Alonzo Miller, who was the Cranbrook Academy of Art printer. And so Miller, Kirk, and the 2 Booths helped design that seal in 1931, and now it welcomes us into the building. The building is constructed of solid masonry, so those are solid blocks of Mankato stone, and these are load-bearing brick walls. Again, you can take the exterior tour. If you scroll back after this tour on the center's video tabs, you will see the exterior tour. But let's head inside. So Saarinen's great achievement here at Kingswood is this extraordinary sense of restraint and almost conservative design elegance, and always with this amazing sense of proportion. And so the rooms are scaled to young people, to sort of growing minds. So it almost has a domestic scale, even though the building is many thousands of square feet. And what's most remarkable is how thin the building is. And so we're seeing here that I just walked into the green lobby, and not 40 feet from the front door, you can then see back outside. And before the Wenger gym was added in the 1960s, you would actually have a look towards Kingswood Lake. And Saarinen was very intentional about this idea that you come in through a glen of trees from Angley wood. And so you are sheltered underneath the concrete portico, and then you slip into this green tiled lobby, and you're given a view of the lake on the other side. And one of the school's mottos is beside a lake. And so you're given that, the view is hidden by the building from your arrival, and then you walk in and you see it going across. Dr. Jeffrey Welch, who was a longtime instructor here at Cranbrook Schools, talked about before the floor was restored, it had so many layers of wax buildup that you came in and the sunlight would stream through this back window, and it was like entering a forest glen with all of these rich green colors and this sort of glowing floor from the daylight. Now, I mentioned that this floor was replaced in the 1990s by ceramicists at Albion College. The original tiles are all Pawavik. And so the great Detroit-based pottery, arts and crafts pottery, founded by Mary Chase Perry Stratton in 1903. She had had a long relationship with George and Ellen Booth, both in sort of Detroit art circles as founding members of the Detroit Society of Arts and Crafts. She did work for George Booth for ceramic pieces. Their relationship famously fell apart in the 19-teens. They reconnected in 1927 to work on Christchurch Cranbrook. And when she was approached to do the work here for Kingswood, two things happened. First, she said, I'm not sure I want to do it because I am a arts and crafts pottery that does not do commercial production. And doing 140 bathrooms is almost at the scale of doing production. But Eliel Saarinen, who was also friends with Mrs. Stratton, convinces her that there may be 140 bathrooms, but every single element in this building is to be handmade, hand-constructed. And so it's simply a large handcraft. It is not an institutional project. And so that's how we end up with some 5 different Pawavik fireplaces. But more interesting to me than even the fireplaces and the lobby floors are these totally unique Pawavik pottery fixtures. So this is a Pawavik pottery sculpture base, which was designed by Eero Saarinen. Now, the architect Eliel, his son, would have been 19 when design began. He was about 20 when he actually designed this. And it has a very classical form, this fluted column, but you may have seen that mouse popping up, which is, it shows Eero's awareness of history in the way that in medieval church architecture, the woodcarvers would often carve mice into the pulpit. And so they represent, I'm actually not entirely up to date on what they represent, but it is a medieval tradition that Eero is bringing into this Art Deco interior. Now, the sculpture that's resting here is by David Evans, who was a Manchester, United Kingdom-born sculptor. He studied in England and then in Rome in the early 1920s, and he came to Cranbrook in October of 1929. He was only here 1 year. He was the first sculptor in residence at Cranbrook Academy of Art, and he really only did 2 major works at Cranbrook. The Madonna and Child, seen here, which we'll remember the Booths were deeply religious and Episcopalian, and the school was affiliated with the Episcopal Church in its earliest days. And then the other great David Evans piece is the original Cranbrook football team, which is down by the Thompson Oval. So we have the handmade tiles, and we'll get to the stairway, but I want to point out the ceiling, which has this wonderful silver stencil and then teal patterning. This is all the work of Pipson, their daughter. And then Pipson and her father developed something that Eliel Saarinen had been doing in his architecture since about 1905, which is calling out the corners with a different material. Here he just is using paint, but look at the joint he creates between these handmade small tiles, each of them irregular. Mary Stratton refused to use metal molds, which would have gotten much more standard tiles. She always used plaster molds, so she could only get a few hundred tiles out before a new mold was made. So you'll see that all the tiles are quite different. And then instead of just joining the tile with this little ledge and then up to the plaster, he calls out in 3 different colors. This sort of warm gray, the light, almost white, and then this very dark green. And then if we step back, we see the way that when this repeats on all corners of the building, it really frames the architectural space, and it highlights his sense of proportion, but also his sense of depth and the way that he lines views up. And so I'm standing here, and I'm not lined up with the front door, so it's a shifting axis. And that is sort of Saarinen's great genius, is his ability to do these balanced, asymmetrical compositions. Now, the fire is roaring, but the heat is actually being piped in through steam pipes and coming out the vent there. And you'll see that design will repeat in all different materials. And as we look back at the front door, we see more of the heating grates, now with Pawavik pottery heating return towards the bottom, and then the metal covers with the paint outline. And you see this, it's unlike at the boys' school where there's a sort of endless amount of geometric forms and architectural ornament. Here, Saarinen is really working in a very restrained vocabulary, and it's all about geometry and repeated motifs. So whether that's fluting, telescoping forms, or repeating sort of squares within squares, he gets a lot of mileage out of these certain motifs, and they appear everywhere from the teacup down to or the teacup up to the scale of the building. And that was how he taught his architect students to design, is that the architect was always responsible for the next largest and the next smallest scale. Now, as we step in, Saarinen builds niches into the building, which have been filled over time. And this is one of my favorite sculptures. I see she has a mask now, done by a long-term art teacher here at Cranbrook. And you're meant to spin her around. This is in remembrance of Suzanne Anderson Stingline. And so she has all these different sort of ancient runes that one can discover that reflect the sort of interest of a Kingswood girl. So I've never actually caught a student spinning her around and studying her, but it is meant to be examined. Now, down this hallway, underneath these wonderful lights with the sort of octagon with the corners cut off, we head into the original library. And remember, the school is set up for pandemic-era learning. And so this library, which was converted by Saarinen into a study hall, has now been adapted into a classroom. But here we are seeing some reproduction textiles. Loya Saarinen and her studio, Loya Saarinen, would have hand-woven the originals, and these are pretty faithful reproductions. The originals are at the Art Museum, and they're actually just brighter than these. And in the principal rooms, like the library here, there were 3 hand-woven rugs, hand-woven upholstery on the chairs, hand-woven drapes. In the minor spaces like staff lounges, dormitories, and the longest hallways, they were commercially woven, but Loya Saarinen still designed them. So there are many, many, many thousands of square feet of hand weavings that belong in this building that are no longer here. So I appreciate this room, but that they have gone to the commitment to reproduce the textiles. And then we're coming up as the days get longer, but only ever so slightly. I realize it's going to get dark, but this great prow of a window looks out towards Kingswood Lake. And this curve was quite difficult for the construction, for the masons to achieve. And Saarinen actually had them tear down this entire wall 3 times until they were able to get the curve laid just so. Now, I mentioned this was the original library, and the bookshelves, when Saarinen converted it into a study hall, you'll see he simply added these panels into the original bookshelves, and so the original bookshelves are still back there. We're coming up to the original card catalog there on the left, and then this great plywood fireplace surround with the bent molded plywood, and then another Pawavik pottery tile fireplace. Now, above this fireplace hangs Marion Goodale, who I think her niece might be watching us today. She was the headmaster here at Kingswood from 1950 to 1967. She helped build Robin Hill, which was the headmistress's residence, now the Dean of Schools residence. You'll see these Pawavik pottery tiles are much larger than what we saw in the lobby. And this design, this is actually one tile here. And so you'll see the different ways that Saarinen creates the patterning is by creating these very massive tiles. So I feel like what you'd see in contemporary construction would be a limited amount of corners and lines, and then you would get the design by stacking the tiles. Here you see that the tile itself is the design, and it's a regular rectangular grid that then features the custom tiles. And then the wonderful bricks that are reflected on the outside of the building and some of the exterior design coming into the back face of the fireplace. Now, I know I've got a lot of alumni and former teachers and faculty watching, so if I soar past something that you want to see in more detail, please make sure to comment. Facebook doesn't quite tell me every comment. I don't know how it decides, but if I am ignoring your question or your request, I do apologize. I can't always know exactly who is commenting what. Now, as I walk down this hallway, we're getting a sense of the mastery of artificial and natural light, relying mostly on artificial right now, but you'll notice there's only classrooms on one side of the building. And so it's always a hallway full of windows on one side and classrooms on the other. Twice as expensive to build this way because you end up, you still have as much of a roof, you have as much to insulate, and you're not getting, it's not an efficient way to design a building, but it is a beautiful way to design a building. And some of the classrooms have been restored. So this one is being used as faculty offices, but it was restored about a decade ago to Pipson and her father's design for the interiors. So it has this really beautiful acid wash oak stain in this interesting sort of yellow, gray, green color. And then it has, again, the corners called out now in teal, and that continues all the way up to the ceiling. So what you're seeing is an inch line on the wall and then an inch line on the ceiling to call out those corners. And then these can lights here, which are actually just ceramic light fixtures, fit within riveted aluminum cylinders because can lights had not been invented yet, are called out with the little lines. And then the wonderful radiator covers, again with this lovely detail of the woodwork leading to the shadow joint, this reveal that creates a motif that essentially mirrors itself in the brick wall outside. And then these great walls of windows. Now, these are the original Next, we're headed into the original study halls. So if you had been a girl in 1930, just 70 students, and you would have had for the upper class, or the seniors, the juniors, and the sophomores, 3 study halls. This was called the West Lobby. It had absolutely the most stunning rugs, and the West Lobby rugs were all in wonderful oranges and reds, and this room had great bright red furniture with black detailing. It was really quite an impressive study hall and lobby area. It converted in 1980 by TMP architects into the library. But there are little remainders of the West Lobby in places like the molding, where you see this bright red color called out around the wooden moldings. And then follow the moldings around, and we begin to see that some of the wooden panels are replaced with glass. And so you have these leaded glass designs where Saarinen is creating these new shapes in the caming of the window itself. So he's using the lead, the actual structure to hold the glass, to create the design. Now, the library looks out onto the original terrace, where at 10 a.m. every day, the girls were served fresh squeezed orange juice. In the warmer months, they would have it out here on the terrace overlooking the lake. And then in the cooler months, they would have it here in the West Lobby. And of course, the gymnasium was not there, so the terrace was overlooking the lake. This is one of my favorite windows. I'll try and post a photo of it because we're not getting the full effect, but this idea that the wood paneling, which goes floor to ceiling, is just entirely replaced with glass. This is not a glass door, this is just a window. And the way that he pierces, he punches it out, but keeps the language of the wooden molding going along, impossibly chic. Now, as we turn into one of the study halls, which was adapted into the library and is currently a classroom, we are coming across some of the cost-saving measures. Of course, the school was built in the Great Depression, and so original design details like scalloping each of those edges with a shallow relief ends up being flattened, and Saarinen achieves a similar effect with paint. Next, we see possibly my favorite Pawavik fireplace here, and the interaction between the pottery tiles and the architecture. In the other fireplaces, I think they were really, celebrating the ceramic, the tile. Here, where the tile is just on the edge of these curving niches, so impossibly chic, so intriguing of a design, where the fireplace itself is actually quite, minimalistic. The Pawavik window ledge, the Pueblic front, but then the entire wall becomes the sort of overmantle leading up to these wonderful domes, plaster domes that are called out in the orange paint. And the furniture here was all orange and beige and cream. So you went from a sort of red lobby into the orange study hall. Now, while we're here, we're seeing some original furniture by Eero Saarinen. These chairs were designed for the dormitories. They're now in use here. And so Eero Saarinen was just 19 when he began designing some 40 pieces of furniture for use here at the school. Part of the center's role is stewarding the remaining pieces of Eero's furniture. Of course, we keep copies of each type of furniture at the art museum in the museum vault. But then part of my job and my role is working with the schools to make sure that the furniture that is still here we can still use and it still has a useful life, because why are we hanging on to all of this original furniture if we're not going to use it? It's well built and it was designed for these spaces. So do all of the plastic chairs kind of make me weep inside? A little bit. But I do think that this building tells us the adaptability of the architecture and Saarinen's ability to build a building that now, close to 100 years later, is still extraordinarily useful and beautiful. So this room ends not in a fireplace, but in a window that overlooks the athletic fields. But again, this sort of ceremonial end to the room with the lights there. And then again, budget-saving measure, flattening out these soffits so that you end up with the line work. Now, as I pass through here, do you see this shadow joint along the door? You can see there are some screw marks. I actually thought there would be hooks here. These are where the portieres, the curtains that subdivided these rooms, were hanging. And so we'll see a picture of this room here, and you can see the way the curtains hang down to divide these spaces. When the contractor was trying to specify these hooks, he gave Loya Saarinen some options, and she wrote him a curt note back saying, "No thanks, I have better hooks in Sweden." And so she provided all the hooks for all of the drapes. When this was converted to the library, the stairway was closed off, and so originally this would have been open into the stairway down to the lower school, the original middle school level. Of course, the middle school for girls opened its own building in 2011, but I thought I'd step down and just show you that even the lower level gets quite beautiful attention from Saarinen. I mean, it is, what a way to land on the stairway in this wonderful lobby with this great brass basin designed by Saarinen, manufactured by Caldwell and Company of New York, who we talked about at great length in Cranbrook House. This is another piece by the Caldwell Company. And then this dome, which is really quite shallow, it's cast into the concrete of the building, but because of the way that Saarinen designs it, it has this almost James Turrell effect, where it looks as if this is just open air. It is completely mind-bending exactly how deep that dome is. And of course, it reflects his design for his own house over at the Academy, Saarinen House. And originally, even the stairway would have mirrored Saarinen House with post going up. Now, as we walk down the hallway, and if you're just joining us, we're doing a live tour of Kingswood School for Girls, which opened in 1931 and is now used for the coeducational Cranbrook Kingswood Upper School. And we're doing a tour of its interior design and features. As we walk down the hallway, we're walking over a modern broad loom carpet. The original rugs were designed by Loya Saarinen. They were not hand-woven. She needed way more linear feet than was made any sense to hand-weave. But the original rugs were actually just this light part. And then this was actually linoleum, and it was patterned linoleum that was cut out to have this design. And so in the 2000s, when they carpeted the building, they reproduced the runner, the linoleum, all in carpet. Now, weaving is, of course, the craft of Cranbrook. It is the sort of basis of all of Cranbrook's craft and artistry. And so the weaving workshop here at Kingswood School for Girls, which is still in operation, was led by Mrs. Saarinen. Now, she was weaving on Cranbrook Looms. These are Maycombers here in the front. And so these are some of the original Loya Saarinen type looms, adapted from a rigid Swedish style loom. These are called Cranbrook Looms because they were developed by John Bexell for Studio Loya Saarinen. So all of the weavings that were originally here in the school were woven on similar looms over at the Academy of Art. And you see some of the student projects done under the direction of Lynn Bennett Carpenter here. Lynn is the head of the weaving program. She's a graduate of the Academy of Art's fiber program. And you'll see that in order to get 60 looms in this space, they do just sort of keep going and going and going as far as the eye can see. Now, this space, the lighting has changed, but it really has its original bones. And Loya actually used this room to exhibit her own weavings in the year the school opened. Again, there were only about 70 girls that year, and the building is the same size now with 500 students, so there was pretty ample space. I love the green call out here, and then an odd fact that we'll see throughout Kingswood, which is Loya Saarinen's signature Swedish curtain hooks no longer being used. But do you see how that curtain rail, the dark line in front of the curtain closer to the green, that is the original curtain rail, and you'll see that it is built into the entire building. It runs right underneath this plaster beam that is encasing the concrete. And it runs right alongside the gutters, which are also cast into the building and part of the concrete construction. There's a lot of very clever construction details here with the building. Now, Loya Saarinen was head of the weaving workshop, but you're correct, Jill, or whoever commented about Lillian Holm. Lillian Holm, who immigrated from Sweden to work for Studio Loya Saarinen, took over the weaving shop here at Kingswood in 1936 and stayed until 1965. And we'll see some of Mrs. Holm's work a little bit later. I mean, look at these windows, and this is just into the sort of classroom wing. Now it leads to the school bus turnaround, so the students do enjoy this view. And there's a printing studio on my left and then a painting studio on my right, but those are a little dark, so we'll keep moving back to the green lobby. So next we will drop by the lower form study hall, which again has been adapted into a socially distanced classroom, but get to give you a sense of Eliel Saarinen's ability to work a theme to endless variety. Do you see how we have yet another form of a geometric ceiling called out with colored lines? And then one of my favorite fireplaces here, which is done without Pawavik, but is simply plaster, leading to this square niche where Maya Grotel designed a ceramic vessel. And so there was this beautiful blue ceramic Grotel vase in that niche, and then this beautiful blue furniture room above the fire. And of course, that vase is safe and secure, and when that screen is no longer necessary, I would be more than happy to put that Grotel vase back in its fireplace. Now, we're going to keep moving along here. And as we walk the hallway, we're seeing some of the student art. The students can take, I think, 12 different artistic disciplines, so one more than the academy art. The students here can do jewelry making as well as videography, which the academy does not offer. But many of the art teachers here at Cranbrook Kingswood are graduates of the Art Academy. Now, I want to head up in the green lobby, past this maquette of the Bull in Europa by Carl Millis. And as we look at this stairway, do you see these wonderful Pawavik handholds and this same scalloped motif, this very gentle curve? And you'll see that it's not just the tiles laid in a curve, but the tiles themselves are actually curving. And so there is a slight curve to each of these handmade tiles. And then the girls are meant to grab into what look like to me little baptismal fonts, and this is the way that you ascend the stair. Now, Mrs. Booth came by and she saw this stairway. What she did not see were the railings. And she asked her architect, Eliel, what kind of railing will you put there? And he said, it's a wide stair. They have the handhold. The design really works better without a railing. And I can just picture Mrs. Booth sort of saying, okay, well, what railing are you going to put there? Because we must have a railing on that side. It's difficult for you to see through Facebook Live, but the stairs are actually quite shallow because Eliel Saarinen thought that American salad plates were too small and our stairs were too high. And since he designed everything here at Cranbrook, he gave us big salad plates and little stairs. And these are particularly shallow because he was thinking about the girls and their pumps. The girls had to wear tied shoes and socks. They could not wear loafers. And so it's this very gentle way of going up and down stairs. So if you count the stairs for the height that we're going to go, we'll go up a lot more stairs because they're very shallow. And so you can sort of glide up past these Art Deco Greek Revival brass handles. And then we look up at this incredible window, which we're just getting the last of daylight coming through. And do you see how the windows are held in this frame where they meet in this perfect triangle? So you have a structural triangular structure for the windows, and then you have the black triangle in the leaded glass. And originally you would have then arrived at a carpet at the top of the stairs, which also had a black triangular design. Now, as we pass by, we're passing a radiator grill by Pawavik, and you'll see that instead of being solid, they have the hole to allow the heat to come through. Now, this is actually the original linoleum we're walking across from 1931, so give it up for the Linoleum Company of America, because it is doing great. And we've come to this comical lion here. Now, this lion was designed by Eero Saarinen, the architect's son. And so it is a lion with a cornucopia on its back. It's a classical form. Much of the Art Deco language came from world cultures, and so this is a sort of Greek form that was adapted by the Romans. But Eero's version of it is much more comical because his lion is sort of bursting with laughter here at the front, and so it's a very friendly lion. And then it is also the only light for this room. So in the same way that echoing dome chamber was illuminated by a single source, the lion here, which was manufactured by Pawavik and sculpted by Eero Saarinen, is the sole source for this great stair lobby. It is very Assyrian, yes. Now, we are seeing some of the original linoleum floors here. We're also seeing this vaguely Egyptian revival furniture that is Eero Saarinen's design. We get a sense of how the linoleum floors would have looked, as well as how they would sound. It was very loud with all the linoleum floors. Now, originally there was a little lobby for the girls here called Old Scandinavia, and we'll see some of Scandinavia a little later. It was moved in 1963. At the end of the hallway, through these unfortunate doors, that it was open originally, you can see that there's a sculptural niche at the end with those telescoping forms with the wall colors called out with paint. And then here you get the view looking down where again it's this telescoping form. So the rectangle in rectangle in rectangle in rectangle looking down the hallway. It was built as a girls' school, so there are very few men's restrooms, but here is one. And then we're also seeing light fixtures, these manufactured commercially, but duplicating a custom light fixture that Saarinen designed for his own house on Academy Way. The one on Academy Way is cast brass. These are manufactured in silver-plated metal, so a slightly less handmade feeling, but repurposing a successful design that he did the year before here at Kingswood. Now, as we pass through this little altered area, we see more of Saarinen's light fixtures. And this time they're given this sort of aluminum leaf backing. And do you see how the cloud shape of the light fixture then repeats with the stencil and light or aluminum there? Now, from here, we pass the old phone booths, which are now used as broom closets, but you'll see that the phone booths have leaded glass windows. So Saarinen really did think of everything. The girls were not allowed to smoke on campus until they were seniors, and they could smoke in the senior cabins. I don't know who exactly they were calling on the phone here. They were not allowed to drive with day students if they were boarding students. It was a pretty regimented place. And the early headmaster, who was the sort of rule maker, was Margaret Auger. And Mrs. Auger would stand at the end of every school day. She would stand right here in the green lobby, and she would shake the hand of every girl, greet them by name, and say, "Good afternoon." So it was a very formal place. You got dressed up for school, and the headmaster was right there sort of guiding you through your Kingswood career. Now, as we walk down this hallway, we're passing a lovely painting by American artist from Michigan Myron Barlow, who worked in Paris and was associated with the Detroit Society of Arts and Crafts, donated by an alumni in the 1960s. We're passing more of Eero Saarinen's furniture that he designed for the school. And so when you think about this is the architect who did the Gateway Arch and TWA Terminal and Dulles Airport, all of these futuristic buildings, it is interesting to see here with close to their original colors, this brown furniture with these very sort of muted tones. Now, it's hard to see as we come down the hallway, but I just stepped down 3 steps, so the ceiling has gone up in height. It is a grander proportion. It's gone from a square hallway to a rectangular hallway, and we are approaching the sort of grand public lobby. And so this is where, for public events, for events with your parents, this is the door they would use. And you see, versus the green lobby, the rose lobby, which is missing all of its rose elements, but it did have rose curtains and rose portieres and rose rugs, much grander scale, almost civic public architecture in scale. And then if we turn back towards the hallway, if the ramp that quite necessarily makes the building accessible, if the ramp wasn't there, do you see how Saarinen repeats with the stairs, with the door frames, all the way? So you have these repeating rectangles that if we were to shoot all the way to the end of this hallway and look at that leaded glass window, it is essentially the same pattern repeated at the scale of the individual pane of glass. That's pretty good. And as you walk down the hallway, you hardly even notice things like these middle frames, which actually house rolling metal screens. So if there was a performance here in the auditorium, you could seal off the classroom wings. Now, I mentioned Lillian Holm, who was our Swedish weaver, who was instructor here at Kingswood from 36 to 65. We're seeing here a hand weaving she made in the 30s, the Llamas Tapestry, one of the Kingswood cultural properties that the Center for Collections and Research helps maintain for the schools. Now, the Rose Lobby here originally had a 12 by 26 foot rose colored rug designed by Maya Anderson Virta under Loya Saarinen. And then this lobby also had these fabulous, and they survive, gold, silver, and rose-colored curtains, but they were sort of very heavy, very different from those hand-woven reproductions we saw. These were much more dramatic, much more Art Deco, much more sort of Rockefeller Center, and less, dainty Paris salon. And so those curtains hung all the way here to the floor, and they really gave the definition that you were entering into the Rose Lobby. The furniture here has been reproduced in a red, but similar enough color. And then the ceiling, which is yet another version of Aliel's light fixtures. Now, I know everyone's excited to see the next 2 rooms, but before we head in there, I do just want to point out through this door, we see the telescoping form in the wood. We see the repeating series of triangles. And then you look out at the columns, which are yet more telescoping forms. And so you see these fluted columns, which are load-bearing masonry limestone columns supporting this concrete roof. Now, I'm pointing out the radiators in the green lobby, and so here you'll see that the radiators have a different motif. This time they have the triangle with the little telescoping form, which is then picked up not in the leaded glass window, which is simply the telescoping form, so it's calling the door, but here you see on the framework of the window, this great steel frame, you see the triangle has been picked up here. And then additional tapestries by Lillian Holm. In 1935, Henry Booth approached Aliel Saarinen with the idea of adding in the alumni names onto the wooden panels of this lobby. And so Aliel Saarinen did direct the original carving of alumni names. And from the 1930s to the 1950s, they're all here, including some Booth family members like the Elizabeth Ellen Wallace, who tragically passed away shortly after her graduation. There's a beautiful portrait of her in the green lobby. But her classmate also up here, Florence Margaret Schust, who would go on to become Florence Margaret Schust Knoll, Florence Knoll, later Florence Knoll Bassett, the great furniture designer, one of the very first Kingswood students to then go on to the Art Academy. And so she studied here as an orphan, as a boarding student. She had a progressive instructor in design. The very first woman graduate of Cornell's architecture program was our first instructor in design at Kingswood. And so when young Florence, told her art instructor, "I want to be an architect," instead of saying, "Well, women are not architects," she said, "Build me a building, build me a model, and we'll take it over to Mr. Saarinen and see what he says." And that struck up a lifetime of friendship between this young orphan and the world-famous Finnish-American architect. And so Florence, who many people thought, including Mrs. Saarinen, should marry young Eero, she is essentially adopted by the Saarinens, and she spends her school years living in the dorms here, her Christmases back at Saarinen House on Academy Way, her summers in Finland. And then she goes on to study at the Art Academy, at the Architectural Association in London, and then with Mies van der Rohe in Chicago, before working as an architect in New York and marrying the furniture maker Hans Knoll, and then revolutionizing furniture design, and much of it credited to her experience of being a young girl in this total work of art here at Kingswood. Now, so I mentioned that Eliel Saarinen helped in the design, or in the selection and approval of these designs, but you do see that there's a sort of endless variety that kind of reflects the period. So 50s sort of storybook carvings. I'm sort of more intrigued by the Art Deco carvings painted in with the Kingswood swans going around, or here, who knows what that is. Now, the rooms that I have avoided showing you so far, where we'll head next, are the auditorium and the dining hall. And so these rooms are back-to-back. The auditorium here with its great fabricoid and velvet curtain designed by Pipsan Saarinen Swanson, the Saarinen's daughter. Pipsan also designed the stencils going up the wall and the stencils on the ceiling. And then the ceiling light with these reflectors and domes was designed by a young Eero Saarinen. Originally in these rooms, there were metal, chrome-plated tubular steel chairs that reflected the most sort of avant-garde designs of the Bauhaus in Germany. And those were ringing the room and reserved just for seniors. Now, I did have a request from a member of the class of 1963 to come over, and so I'm not sure where your name is, Susan, but here is the class of 1963. So the carvings moved into the auditorium after the Rose Lobby was completed. There we see Susan. So if you're watching, your name is still there. It hasn't been scratched off. Been living right. Santa will bring you presents. We do see Pipsan's wonderful stencils going up, and then these clear story windows. Now, as we look back, we'll head next to the dining room, but do you see how these walls of glass appear to just open up through across the space? These are actually sliding doors, so this entire window wall disappears, and you can have one room straight across. Now, before we head that way, I'll just do a little bit of a close-up on the curtain. This is a reproduction of the original. Fabricoid was a plastic-based material, so it's not silver leather. It's fabricoid and velvet curtain, designed again by Pipsan Saarinen Swanson. And then if we just step out here, we'll again see the thinness of the building in that from the auditorium you then can look out at the beautiful columns, the dormitory wings, which none of the girls are here, so they're quite dark, and then the lake is straight out there. Make sure you go back to my first tour of Kingswood. We walked around the exterior in daylight. So next we will head into the dining hall. And again, you can just see that crack that make these pocket doors slide into the wall. And then we get into this very feminine, very chic, sort of Scandinavian classicism dining hall. And when you think about the design of Cranbrook School for Boys, which is very medieval, it's like a medieval Finnish church combined with sort of Oxford and Cambridge. Kingswood, these interiors are so fresh and they're so modern. And a lot of the press reviewing these buildings in the 30s said, Eliel Saarinen has given us the future of architecture. This austere simplicity is a sort of, quote, frank and absolute attention to detail is the architecture. And I think you see that here, where it is no longer referencing any sort of historic design, but it's something new, taking history and adapting it for the modern world. And that includes the design of the furniture. I mentioned the Bauhaus chairs across the way, which I didn't see any to show you, but I've done other Live at Fives that included those chairs. Here you have this Clismos chair, an ancient Greek form adapted through the lens of 1920s Stockholm. Very fashionable in Scandinavia. It was called the Swedish Grace style. And a young Eero Saarinen here adapts the Swedish Grace style into a chair for the girls. They sat at groups of 5 with one teacher at the table who directed conversation in a circle. The staff would have served the meal from these sideboards, and it was a very formal occasion to have a meal here in Kingswood. Now, illuminated by these wonderful riveted aluminum light fixtures, which were designed by Eliel Saarinen in the great new wonder material of aluminum. They're topped with peacocks in the same way that the boys' school has the peacock andirons. Here the peacocks are much more abstracted, and they sit on top of light shining down on the festival of the May Queen Tapestry. And so this tapestry, which is made of linen and wool and rayon, as well as other materials and homespun dyes from Finland, or homespun material from Finland combined with machine-made woolens that were from Jamaica Plain, Massachusetts. It's a real sort of international source material for materials, and then Swedish weavers working under Finnish designers for this American dining room. It was woven in sections. It took 2 years, 5 weavers to work on, mostly Lillian Holm and Ruth Ingverson, who were executing Eliel and Loya's design, with the May Queen, the goddess of fertility, here at the center, surrounded by her maidens who are offering her oranges here. There's a little dog behind her, everyone in their practical black pumps that actually look just like Loya Saarinen's preferred footwear. And then they're all in dresses that reflect the architectural designs that we've seen throughout the Kingswood School. And then they sort of hold this great row of butterflies or flowers moving through the center of the maidens towards the May Queen, who is then surrounded by a great tree, an abstracted tree of life with peacocks who are flying about. And then up at the top, you have this sort of other birds. I don't know, they kind of look like seagulls, but you have the sort of flying birds surrounding the tree. And all of it is subdivided in this grid, and you see the way the grid is irregular. So you have narrow bands, then wider bands, and it's also irregular in this direction. And I think that quite perfectly reflects the way that the bricks are laid on the building, or the metalwork is made, where it has this balance to the composition, but an irregularity that reflects the sort of natural growth that you would see in nature. Now, the light fixtures around the room are by Walter von Nessen, and they were selected by Eliel Saarinen to use in the space. You will see quite often the design is attributed to Saarinen. They were not. They are from the Nessen studio, selected by Saarinen. And then the girls actually ate on plates which had a cipher which we attribute this design to Eliel Saarinen. And remember, the chairs are by Eero, so the chairs are the sun. And they have a vinyl, a very practical vinyl now, but it was originally a linen and wool damask on the seats in this wonderful silver birchwood. But then the plates were ordered and coordinated by Loya Saarinen, who also coordinated the silverware, the linens, and then Eliel designed the headmaster's table, the headmistress's table, which was originally below the tapestry. There was a 2 steps up to a high table in the English boarding school tradition. And the Saarinens would come and eat here, and they would always be sat at the table of honor. So the head of the dining facility always had fresh flowers in case the Saarinens or the booths arrived and they wanted to be seated at the head table. One of the early secretaries of the school talks about getting calls from Cranbrook House, and they would say, Mr. and Mrs. Booth are walking over to Kingswood, and all the secretaries would start shuffling their desks, making sure everything looked great. They'd ring down to the facilities, and they would mop around all the linoleum carpets, make sure all the rugs were looking perfect and all the tassels were in place, and then Mr. and Mrs. Booth would get in and just check on the daily life of the school. Now, one little story that's recorded in archives was a 1940s graduate who, in protest about the food and the stale cornbread muffins of the dining hall, she took her muffin and she threw it into the air, and it never came back down. And so she sort of wondered if her muffin was forever stuck up there in one of the light fixtures. These light fixtures were wired by Eliel Saarinen so that the mood of the room could change. And so those are windows letting natural light in through triangular shaped leaded glass windows. And then you have the electric light, and do you see how the shadow is being cast in triangles? And the entire thing is wired so that you can dim the room, but you keep the triangles on the ceiling. And so it's a sort of multifunctional, multi-dramatic sense of space that you can use and always keep the design as Saarinen wanted. Oak walls with an acid wash, and then the floors are also oak with a dark, sort of subtle gloss finish. Now, the next part of the tour, I'm going to end it upstairs. We're not going to go up to heaven today because there's not really much we can see out of heaven at this time of night. So the dormitories are back here. There were originally 150 boarders. By doubling up the rooms, I know they have more. And so the girls have their own sort of system of lounges and house mothers and families that live back there with the girls with all their beautiful Saarinen furniture. But I want to take us to a little error in the building construction. On a tour of the building, Eliel Saarinen realized that there was a drain pipe that was coming down from the roof, and the drain pipe was popping through the plaster wall, and there was sort of nothing that you could do about it. And if you look at Kitty Kingswood, you can see that is definitely a drain pipe. And so it was a construction error. The contractor sort of says, sorry this happened. We have to redesign this area because, the wood paneling is here, the stairway. We'll have to somehow bump out the wall. We can't move the pipe. And Eliel Saarinen, who studied painting and architecture, he liked to say that studying architecture was the logic of a cool mind, and studying painting was the necessity of a warm heart. He saw this error, and he said, bring me my paints, we'll resolve this. And George Booth liked to say that it was a poor workman who could not make a mistake into an ornament. And that is exactly what Eliel Saarinen did. So he took his paints, and he transformed the drain pipe into this young lady with this great circle skirt and these sort of Scandinavian shoes, a swan swimming by her, the great Kingswood swans. And then she has a flag with this great Kingswood K atop it. Now, she's sort of hidden up here in this corner, but all of the Kingswood girls knew her. They knew this sort of epic story of their architect coming to save the day with the error of the building. But it wasn't until 1946 that she got a name. And that was when the Saga of Kitty was published in May of 1946. And it was written by a Kingswood student. And it explains the sort of more mythical origins of this Kitty Kingswood, which was that a graduate in the early years of the school was so in love with her Kingswood days and being a Kingswood girl, and she never wanted to leave her beautiful building. And so after she went to graduation at Christ Church Cranbrook, she came back to Kingswood for one last look, and as she was looking around the building, she simply merged into the wall. And that is how Kitty of Kingswood became one with the building. And so after 1946, Kitty Kingswood becomes the sort of mascot. In the 1950s, they would have dolls made of her. Of course, the mascot now are the cranes, but also sometimes the aardvark. There's a number of mascots, but Kitty is the sort of, I think, spiritual heart of Kingswood. And she is such a charming work of art by the architect right here on this little stairway ornamenting a drain pipe. Now, I mentioned old Scandinavia, which was the lounge. This is where it moved in 1963. The original old Scandinavia had hand-woven rugs that came over the cushions and onto the floor. And so it was bench raya, which is a Scandinavian weaves technique and furniture form that there is an example of at Saarinen House and that the Saarinens brought with them to America. Now, moving through these unfortunate light fixtures, we see the old staff dining area, which the faculty could sit up here. It's now being used as a classroom because of COVID, and the staff could look down at the dining room, and they could see all of their Kingswood girls dining or studying. And as they look through these doors, which are operable, and so you can close this room off, and these all feature hand paintings done by Pipsan Saarinen. And so these are not stencils, these are actually hand painted, and so she brought her paint set up, and on some of them you can still see her pencil line, where she penciled in the oval and then freeform painted these. And there are a number of different design motifs. So looking into the dining room, they're sort of land-based. Then there are some that are sea-based. And then you can see over here. And so the colors of the school, which are always sort of coral and teal and silver, are reflected based on whether they're looking into the teal of the auditorium or the coral of the dining hall. And then here we see back into the auditorium. So I do see your comments going by. I hope that I'm looking forward to reading these after I'm not walking around with a camera in the space. I really appreciate so many alumni joining us today for what is turning out to be our longest Live at 5, special holiday edition. You get me for even longer, shortly before my dad is arriving to celebrate Christmas here at Cranbrook. My sister got here earlier today. We have all been quarantining and not seeing anyone so that we can see each other. And I hope that there is no internet up here, so we're now at the very top of the building, the 6 floors up, the old ballroom. And what survives of this room is the one dome. Now, this room did not meet building code in 1931, and it didn't meet building code by the 1940s, which is when it stopped being used as a ballroom. And so it does look out over all of Bloomfield Hills. Maybe one day we'll come up during the day because there's not much to see, but you can see how high up we are. Now, Eliel Saarinen adapted this room and converted it into apartments, but here you can see the original design. And the great curse of heaven, as it was called, was that there's only one stairway in and out. So they did use it for ballroom practice and dancing in the 30s, but it quickly became a liability, a hazard to have students up here. And so today, out of safety and precautions, we do not use this area for anything. Now, I'm going to head back down. We may lose connection as I switch from cell service back to Cranbrook Wi-Fi. Of course, the floor below heaven is known as purgatory. And then we get back to old Scandinavia, and even just the design of the railing here and the way that Saarinen creates it. Of course, Saarinen had no horizontal. None of this building meets building code, but the horizontals were added for safety. But look at the way that he lands the stairway coming down with that design. So I hope that this was a fun tour for everyone. I have been wanting to do it for a very long time. I'm grateful to Amy Claire Roche, the director of Cranbrook Schools, for allowing us to come through Kingswood on a tour at a moment where the only people here are some members of facilities and the families who live here in Kingswood, because there are family apartments, so there are people who are here hanging out. It has been a unique year, of course, here at Cranbrook, unique for the students, unique for the staff, and I know so many of you love this place and loved being Kingswood girls, are later being Cranbrook Kingswood Cranes, and so it has been a joy to take you through what is pretty indisputably the Saarinen family masterpiece. This building demonstrates the best in total design, where one mind coordinates every aspect of life. And I think the success of the building through the years, whether that was in the Great Depression when they couldn't afford to heat the whole building, and so the building opens and immediately 3/4 of it closed down because there weren't that many students and there was not enough money, or whether it was by the 1940s when they're already complaining about tourists and people coming through to see the architecture distracting from the building. It has been internationally renowned and successful since the day it opened, but all of that praise and all the design we looked at is only as useful as the home it has made for so many students, for boarding students, for faculty, and then of course for the day students who are able to come and learn in an environment that is really just extraordinary and quite sublime. I certainly look forward to the day when I can come back and start eating here again as a staff member, and when we can all begin enjoying the sort of facilities as they were originally intended. I hope that this has been a joy to your holiday season. I hope if you've had a happy Hanukkah, I hope you're looking forward to a Merry Christmas or a Happy Kwanzaa, a nice Festivus today, celebrating the solstice on Monday, and then New Year's next week. All the holidays here at this bleak midwinter date. Thanks so much for joining us for what will be, I think, the last Live at 5 of the year. I'll be back in January with some other Cranbrook location. And thanks for all of your suggestions and all of your contributions in the comments. I look forward to reading them and answering any other questions that you may have. Thanks so much for joining us for another Live at 5 with the Cranbrook Center for Collections and Research. I'm Kevin Adkisson, the curator, and closing out from Kingswood School. Until 2021, everyone. Happy holidays.